You're listening to Journey for Truth with internationally known medium, Tai Yi practitioner, and radio host Tami Urbanek.
Hello and welcome to Journey for Truth on iHeartRadio and YouTube. Thank you for joining me. I'm Tami Urbanek. Journey for Truth is always on demand and with many new episodes. On my website, empowermentthroughhealing.org, you can read about life energy flow Tai Yi treatments, and one in particular is called Aborchi. Aborchi is for women who have had an abortion or a miscarriage. And when either of those occur, it can create a compression, suppression within the emotional meridians, which can ultimately create health difficulties within the reproductive organs, and it can create mental and emotional suppression as well. Regardless of how long it's been since the abortion or miscarriage, that treatment is very effective. Also, Haska Harrison with Jonah Life Institute is offering a seminar in May in Denver, Colorado. It's titled, Are You Who You Think You Are? It's going to be fascinating, and you're going to want to read all about it on jonahlifeinstitute.com. Also, you can sign up for their free newsletter. Our topic this week is sensitive and quite controversial. Many of the listeners may have heard about or studied Operation Paperclip, which really was initiated after World War II was over. This operation involved bringing Nazi scientists over to the United States to continue their work, to continue their studying, their experimentation. It has been said, some reports do say that Joseph Mengele was one of those said scientists. I don't know for sure, I wasn't there, but that is in some reports. But more specifically, this operation then led into MKUltra. This was a CIA-led operation to allow scientists to continue their work in experimentation on unwilling individuals, and it has created much harm. Supposedly, it ended in the 1970s. It is stated that it ended in 1973, that many documents were then destroyed by the head of the FBI, as I believe, and the United States Congress did address it in 1975. But there are many reports that state it never really ended, and that would make a lot of sense. If they were getting something from it, it would just go underground and they would continue their work there. So in light of that, I'm bringing a very special guest for a very special episode on Journey for Truth to talk about his experience, his personal experience in MKUltra. His name is Matthew Pauly. He is the author of Murder of Time, and he's going to share with us much information about MKUltra and what he was forced to endure. Matthew, welcome.
Thank you very much, Tami. I'm glad to be here.
I am very glad that you were able to come on this show. This is a topic I've been wanting to cover for quite a long time, and as you can imagine, many people who were part of MKUltra do not want to talk about it, which, I understand that. So this is great. Now, in many cases, trauma creates more trauma, and as I have been reading your book, Murder of Time, you experienced a lot of trauma in childhood that was not really associated with MKUltra. So let's begin with what happened with the rape and then being shown a dead body.
Right. That would have been when I was 8 years old. That was in Western Canada. First, just a little bit about me before we get into the narrative. So I'm living here in Toronto. I was born in Toronto. I was raised in Western Canada, but I came back out east when I was about 17 years old to start going to university, where I did sociology and computer studies. And my parents were Americans. My father was a cultural anthropologist and sociologist. So I have been somewhat of an activist in my university years for social justice and trying to work in the anti-war movement back in the 80s. And then I, was a computer programmer and systems analyst and such for 25 years. But about 10 years ago is when it all started. Now, to get back to your original question. So when I was about 8 years old, my parents had divorced when I was 6. So my mother had us for the Paulys. And when we were with her, we went out to a place in a remote area of British Columbia, a small town of about 500 people. And it so happened that a friend of the family, who was just a kid himself, 17 years old, assaulted me, and it was obviously pretty horrible.
Yeah.
And then to try and shut me up, He pushed me through the forest to where he had unearthed a young woman who had been recently deceased. And so she was sitting naked. And the point was to terrify me. And he said, this is what's going to happen to your mother and you if you tell anybody. So what's interesting is that that event was so traumatic that I actually didn't have any recollection of it for 27 years. The rape part I had remembered earlier, but the actual being shown the dead body part didn't occur until 2005 when wow. I was 27 years later, approximately. So
now the father was there. The father was there. The father, the 17-year-old's father was there.
Well, what happened was once I went hysterical upon seeing the dead body, then I have a blackout. I don't know how it happened, but about an hour or two later, we came back with his father. And his father was one of the leaders in this community. And his father explained that this is the way that they bury their dead people. They don't put coffins. They don't, put any marking gravestones or anything. And that if I told my father, that my father would certainly call the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and that they would investigate, and therefore I shouldn't say anything. And he made me promise. And at first I wasn't going to promise, right. But I saw the cold look in his eyes. I saw there's just a steely, cold look in his eyes, and I knew that in that moment, no one knew where I was, and if I didn't make this man happy, I might not make it out alive. So I said, okay, that's it. I agree. I won't tell my father. And then literally within a day, I had sort of dissociated during part of this, and which meant that my dominant personality had gone to sleep. So I actually had amnesia for 27 years about that last part. And it's related to the story only insofar as they actually select people for MKUltra mind control experiments based on, just from my own experience, there's two criterion they use up here in Canada. One is they look for people that have had a childhood history of severe trauma. And the reason that they look for that is people who have dissociated under psychological trauma, and just so that your people who are watching and listening understand, during a psychological trauma means that there's some threat to either yourself or to people around you, a life threat, like someone might die.
Okay.
And when that happens, if it's strong enough, the person will literally dissociate, which means their dominant personality goes to sleep, and what's left is a childlike presence, which is recording everything in high def. But what happens is when you come out of that dissociative state some minutes or hours later, you will have a complete amnesia for that whole period of time. You will have no memory of it. Now, that is similar to those of you listeners who may have been in the military or even police officers who have experienced post-traumatic stress disorder. They've done studies that show that people who are exposed to psychological traumas as adults are 50% more likely to get PTSD if a man had been actually raped as a child. 50% more likely. And now I've studied this and I've written about it, and I think I understand why. And it's because once the psyche has been fragmented, that is to say, it's dissociated, and there's sort of like a split that occurs, it's much easier for the psyche to split in the future during a traumatic event.
Makes sense.
It's like a block of wood. The first time you chop it is one round piece of wood. It takes a lot of energy and a lot of striking to make that wood split. Once you've got a half piece of the wood, you strike it with the axe, it splits much easier. And when you get the quarter piece of wood and you strike it with the axe, it splits really easy. And this thing, I believe that the psyche works the same way. And this is why they look for people who've had this history of severe trauma in their childhood.
How would they know? I mean, how would they find you? How would they know that you had such a trauma to select you?
Right. Well, in general, through logic, I'll tell you about my case, but I'll just tell you first of all, through logic, I'm certain that they must have spotters in prisons and in mental institutions or elsewhere, and they find people that have to be high functioning. so that they can do, as a test subject, they need to be, relatively high functioning in society, because they want to actually deploy this technology that they're developing on regular people. Now, getting back to my case, they chose me because they knew from a natural disaster and man-made disaster, 2.5 weeks apart, in August of 2005. Briefly, I was working as a computer programmer for a company just across from Pearson International Airport, Toronto. On August 2nd of 2005, it was my second day of work, and I saw a plane crash. It was the Airbus A310, Air France 358, I believe is the flight number. And technically it's called an overrun because it actually overran the runway, but it did a lot more than that. It went over a bumpy field, and then it descended into a gully, and it burst into flames, and the whole aircraft was destroyed.
Amazing.
And it looked like, from our vantage point, when we saw the first white smoke and then it turned to really black smoke billowing out of the ravine, it looked like all these people had died.
Right.
So I, in that moment, experienced a psychological trauma. I split relatively easily. I dissociate relatively easily under these things. I kept feeling like I should be running to that site to try and help those people. I thought they were dying.
I think a lot of people would have felt that. I was reading that in your book, and I think I would have that. I would feel compelled to go run down there. But as you stated in your book, the fire department, ambulances, that type of assistance is going to get there faster than you could run there.
Exactly. So I found myself in this rather strange situation, and I fled through the stairwell to go outside and have a cigarette, and something happened to me in that stairwell. I imagined all those people dying, and I had this vision, literally, of these faces of people burning up. So that was very bad. Then 2.5 weeks later, on August 19th, there was a tornado evacuation in Toronto. And the evacuation on my floor was partial, not complete. And I started arguing with my team leader, saying, look, if there's a threat to the building, we should be evacuating everybody. He was already panicked at this point, and he told me, look, you're on your own. Just say you're on your own. And I said, okay, fine, I'm on my own. So me and another guy stayed behind. And we were the only people at the north-facing part of that building where the tornado or semi-tornado, it didn't technically qualify what hit the building as a tornado because there wasn't enough damage reported. But I happen to know that there was a lot of damage that was not reported. Anyway, so during this event, I went into shock. And once I was in shock, I was trying to be helped out by a very, very nice man who was very much of a hero. He was trying to save my life. And he tried to take me through that stairwell, which I had fled through after seeing the plane crash, which was not really good because I was terrified of going in that stairwell. Suddenly I remembered the plane crash, and I remembered fleeing through that stairwell, and the stairwell was like death to me. And because I was so frightened, and the second time he tried to push me through the stairwell with his arm, literally pushed me through, and I was in a deep state of shock. I had, like, my vision was all messed up. I was seeing black in the middle of my field of vision because there wasn't enough oxygen. I was not rational. I pushed this man hard, which was a very awful, violent thing to do. I felt terrible afterwards. And he thankfully grabbed the handrail on the stairs, landed on the third or fourth stair on his butt, and he twisted his arm, but he's a real hero, and he came back up, and he said, look, you got to talk to me, and you got to get you out of here. And because I had pushed him, basically, he felt that I should be interrogated. There was another person on the team who was a former nurse, one of the programmers, who saw that I had been violent and said I should be interrogated too. It just so happened that this gentleman was also a World War II survivor, like a veteran. And he was with what's called the Devil's Brigade, which is a special operations force between the Americans, the Canadians, the British, I believe.
Okay. And
so this man was highly trained special forces, and so he knew how to do interrogation very well. And they took me down to a darkened room on another floor, and he got his 200-pound nephew to come to the workplace. And he faced me up against a blank wall and asked me questions like, have you ever thought of harming yourself or harming other people?
I was reading this, what I didn't understand was, how did they have the authority to interrogate you like this? They were not the police, they were not the FBI, they were fellow employees who decided you need to be interrogated. That was one question. The other question I was wondering is, why would they only evacuate part of the building? A tornado's coming through. Those two things really surprised me.
Yes, they surprised me too. This is why I objected to their partial evacuation in the first place. I mean, I grew up in Regina, Saskatchewan, where the worst tornado in Canada's history, an F4, ripped through there in about 1910, 1911, and it killed a lot of people. And I know that tornadoes are serious, so this is why I didn't understand their response. I mean, by all accounts, it's just illogical, and it's not following what you would call responsible behavior to not evacuate the whole building. Number two, in terms of authority, this gentleman was actually a contractor. His daughter worked in an office beside the CEO on the fifth floor. And so he wasn't technically an employee. And fourth or third, there was an opportunity because there was no way of really getting police there or anything during this event because the storm was so bad that it would take forever. And they just sort of had the opportunity and decided to jump on it, which was to interrogate me.
Because they feared
Sorry?
because they feared you might hurt someone.
Correct, because I had been violent during this event. The thing was, though, that's also from an ethical perspective is that I wasn't completely out of shock yet. I was still in mild shock when I was being interrogated. Therefore, my faculties for consenting to the interrogation were not present. Secondly, what I said is not. I can't stand by what I said because actually what I said was incorrect stuff. What happened was I was thinking in that moment, I've pushed this man that's violent. I could be charged with assault. So, and here he is interrogating me. I know he's the special forces guy from World War II. I got to give him something so that he'll be distracted from this. Because if I get a criminal record, I'm done as a computer professional. Mm-hmm. So I decided to exaggerate a conversation that I'd had 10 years earlier with a computer programmer friend. This was back in '95 when there was a neoconservative premier in power who had done a number of things that really resulted in people's deaths. For example, cutting the water inspection by so that basically 7 people died of bad water in Walkerton, Ontario. Nonetheless, we had just had a little talk for an hour or so about what a bad guy this guy was, yada yada. But I made it sound like me and him had made plans. We were going to get violent against this guy, which was not true. And the point was I was trying to distract him, and that was a pretty irrational thing to do. But in my defense, I wasn't completely out of shock yet, so I was somewhat irrational. However, there we have the nexus of information that led to me being tagged as a potential terrorist, number one. And number two, they had the information at that point because I told Terry, as I was dying in that stairwell, the top of the stairwell, it got so bad that one pupil got really large and the other pupil was really small. So I was in very dangerous state, and it looked like I was going to die. And all of a sudden, as I thought I was going to die, all of a sudden, the memory came back of 27 years earlier. And I remembered being shown this dead body, and I thought to myself, if I'm going to die, I've got to tell this to somebody because this could be a serial killer. I've got to get this information out to the public, to the police, etc. So I told this guy, Gary, in the book, everything, including the postal code of the place, the year, the people's names, everything, and where they lived. And he wrote it all down because he said, "Are you sure there was no coffin, Matthew?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Oh, no, I'm going to have to write this all down then." So he got paper and he wrote it all down. So the information that they had was twofold. One, that I had suffered severe traumas in my childhood. And two, they considered me a potential terrorist. And that was enough to get me selected for this Joint Control Unified Command 2005, JCUC05. It was on the Department of National Defense website in Canada and the summary of JTF2 activities, which is our special forces. Now, it's just a summary. They don't give a lot of details because this is all black ops stuff. But the summary included that there would be group infiltration and enhanced interrogation techniques used and training. And so both of those things occurred in my place.
Wow.
And in my case.
So how did this lead you to being selected for the experiments at MKUltra?
Well, that's a good question. I can only say that in the van, in the van interrogation that lasted 3.5 hours approximately on approximately November 22nd of 2005, starting at about 9:35 p.m., 3 blocks from the geographical center of Canada's largest city, in the back of a 5-ton armored military truck van, plate 250002, the second half of that event was not anything to do with an anti-terrorist training exercise. It was about teaching how to use torture to take a person all the way down till they dissociate, and then to use hypnosis. And then once you've got them hypnotized, you make them repeat post-hypnotic suggestions of things they will do when they're out of the trance, when they're given a certain trigger.
Okay.
And there was 3 post-hypnotic suggestions. And so like the first one, for example, was, if I ever find a gun in my jacket pocket, I will immediately go to the closest closet in my house, and I will get in the closet, but before closing the door, I will turn the safety off on the handgun. Once I've done that, I will close the door and put the gun up to my head, pull the trigger in one smooth motion. Okay, I had to repeat that a dozen times in the first person, and at the end of that, I had to repeat about 5 times, I will never remember this program until I find a gun in my jacket pocket.
So
I repeat that about 5 times.
The whole point of this was to test to see if they could take an individual who had already been previously traumatized, PTSD, and break down the psyche so that they could see how easy is it to program a person to create a future crime.
Correct, and you got it exactly. And the teacher in this exercise was 5'11", blue eyes, short blonde hair, slim build. His name is, he likes me to call him in my writings Mitch. His actual name is Michael. He's a lieutenant colonel of the U.S. Military Joint Task Force, and he's a field analyst in the CIA. Wow. And he told me that. And so I'm just telling you what he said. Maybe, for legal purposes, I should just say these are alleged, because I'm just reporting what this individual told me. Maybe he was lying.
He could have
However, he did come out of the U.S. consulate when I drove by several times with escalating hand gestures, and I got his picture in profile. So the fact that he works comes out of the U.S. consulate suggests that this supports the titles that he says he has. Certainly, they are consistent with what he told me in January 2015 in the home invasion, which is that his grandfather was one of the Project Paperclip Nazi mind control scientists, and further, that his grandfather did everything that he's done to me, to Mitch, when Mitch started from the age of 5 years old.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And Mitch has done sexual assault to me, by the way, 3 times. And he's, of course, tortured me every time he's home invaded or I've been abducted. I have been tortured. I mean, severely tortured to the point that I dissociate. I've been dosed with scopolamine. I don't know that it was scopolamine. They didn't show me the bottle.
Right.
But it certainly matches exactly all of the descriptions that I've read about this drug. By the way, we should mention, just so people know, scopolamine I think scopolamine is the proper pronunciation. By the way, it's Mengele, Dr. Mengele, as opposed to Mengele. Don't feel bad. I just got that right after 10 years, about a month ago. So anyway, this stuff is from the deadly nightshade family of plants, and it grows indigenous to Colombia, but also in other areas, as my researcher friend and musician points out to me. And this particular drug is so bad that there was this thing called Silk Road. It was a website on the internet where people could buy and sell anything. But even Silk Road would not deal in this stuff. That's how dangerous it is.
I've heard different stories about this particular drug, and it seems to me, and I haven't followed up on this, so I'm just going to throw it out there, that there were some rumors that the assassin of JFK was actually given this drug in order to have him follow through with the assassination. Have you heard any of that type of rumor?
I haven't heard that rumor, but I have, in my investigations of some of the larger assassinations in the United States and terror events in the United States, seen significant indications of exactly the kind of technology that they've been doing research and development on me with. Let me just give you a quote here. Dr. Camille Uribe, who's head of the toxicology unit at San Jose University Hospital, said, "I can give you a gun and tell you to go kill someone and you will do it." All right? So he's an expert on scopolamine. And I can tell you that it's absolutely true. This stuff will completely wipe your free will. And it's interesting. What they do, security is, I'm in the computer business, I deal with security all the time. Mm-hmm. And you have to have layers of redundancy in security for high security things. You got to assume that they're going to hack through the first layer or two. Right. So you've got to have multiple layers. Well, when they want to turn a person into a sleeper, in other words, make a person do something against their will, not in their self-interest, but for the purposes of being a patsy or an actor in some sort of a hate crime assassination or terror shooting.
And then have no memory of it.
Here's how they hedge their bets. First, they do the torture trauma thing that I described what happened to me in the van.
Okay.
And they torture the person all the way down until they dissociate, and then they program with post-hypnotic suggestions after they hypnotize them. By the way, you have no resistance to hypnosis once you've been dissociated. Because when you're dissociated, you have no free will virtually at all at that point. Then you get hypnotized, which loses more free will. Then you're forced to repeat those post-hypnotic suggestions. Then you come out of that experience later, and you have no memory because you were dissociated, but your subconscious remembers the program. But you can't remember it because you repeated, "I will not remember this until I find the gun in my jacket pocket" thing over and over again. So what you are is a walking computer waiting for the trigger. And once the trigger is shown to you, you go into a hypnotic trance. And automatically your whole activity, your behavior is completely compelled. And you have very little resistance to resist it. And this just happened to me in 2015.
Oh, it happened again?
In June. Yeah. Actually, you're speaking to somebody who's actually still subject. Test subject, non-voluntarily. And I had a home invasion in January, and I had a home invasion in February. And what it's escalated to now is that he's bringing dental instruments. And in the January one, he had these dental pliers, and he pulled out 1/3 of a molar, the lower molar, back here.
Okay.
And that's damaged, may have to be extracted. Then in February, he got dental forceps on the above back molar, and went back and forth on it a couple of times. And it's so damaged that I had to get it extracted a week ago.
So, okay, hold on. He took out part of the bottom molder.
Correct.
Why?
Because he wanted me to remember the rules.
Oh, okay, so it was more of a punishment, not to pull something to test for something.
Correct. No test involved. This was torture. Of the kind of thing in the movie Marathon Man. With Dustin Hoffman. This was a Nazi mind control researcher, completely profiled. He's got dental instruments. He's pulled out a stethoscope once before. That was in the van in 2005. He's pulled out all sorts of interesting things. And he's absolutely possessed with his work. And anyway, so I got off track. Go ahead.
That's okay. I was going to ask this question later, but since we're on the topic, if you are still being tortured, you're still being forced to undergo these different tests, you have so much courage to come out and talk about this. You wrote your book. You're on Facebook, which is where I found you. You are very vocal. You've been on other interviews. How did you gather so much courage? And is that why they continue to torture you? Because you are speaking out?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for saying that. It's really about survival. And the more vocal I am, the more it's going to be inconvenient to have me suspicious should I suddenly die. That being said, I have just learned in the past month that I've got to be vocal, but I've got to choose my words. And there's certain things I can't talk about, because if I talk about them, he's going to come back here with his dental pliers. And there's no one protecting me. I've gone through 3 burglar alarm systems in the past year. I have 8 security cameras. I spent over $10,000 on security, and nothing stops him. And so, therefore, I have to negotiate. There's certain things I can't talk about. They're just too damaging. So, but anyway, getting back to where we were going with this, the hypnosis, and how that works. So once they implant these programs, then what they do is they then trigger events and see how you respond. And so I've been abducted from my house. Not abducted from my house, abducted from a street in downtown Toronto where I was working, King Street, which is analogous to Wall Street in Manhattan. It's where the banks are all in King and Bay area. And twice I've been abducted. And so in one case, abducted to an unknown place. It was definitely not, here. Okay. It wasn't even in Canada, because the geography was different. The climate was different. It was much warmer. But I'm not allowed to talk about that. That was what happened in 2008.
Are you allowed to talk about what other types of tests they do? Not necessarily on you, but perhaps generally speaking on others. So on you, they're testing you to see how they can program you to take certain actions against your will. What about other tests that they might be doing of a more, I don't want to say more, that's not the right word, but of a different scientific perspective?
Certainly. I started to investigate that myself, because what's happened in the last couple of events, starting in 2015, 2014, is that I've been tested with weapons, like chemical weapons, and also, specifically on June 21st of 2014, I was lured out of my house to walk the dog at 7 o'clock in the morning, just after my wife had gone to work. And I was lured to a green area about 100 meters from my house. And I don't know how many people were in the operation, but I couldn't believe it. I was lured basically behind a tree, and I had to let go of the leash because the dog wouldn't go. The dog was frightened. And then all of a sudden this man rolls from behind this perfectly trimmed 8-foot hedge, 8 foot wide, 3 foot high. I'd never seen it before, walking by there hundreds of times. It was right along the edge of a parking lot. There was a van behind it. And this man rolls into a crouching position. And he's all black, all dressed in black, and he's got this fire extinguisher nozzle, and this white fog is erupting out of it. And I'm sort of shocked at this point. I'm stunned. And then he stands up, and he steps over this hedge. Actually, his boot went into the hedge, and it started to rock forward on a plank, which is my cue that, this isn't a real bush. This is not good. This means this isn't an insecticide sprayer. This is a Black Hawk. And sure enough, he got over and he just kept spraying me with this stuff. It was all around me. I couldn't see anything. I held my breath. And then slowly it went down. And then I could see his outline. I recognized his body outline. It was Mitch. And I had about 7 seconds.
And it was a drug?
Before I was up. Yeah, it was scopolamine. In 2013, NASA. Now, NASA, of course, is where about half of these people from Project Paperclip went to. These are card-carrying Nazi Party members, okay? And they went to NASA, okay? And the mind control researchers, of course, went to the CIA, the military, and in academia and hospitals and such. So these NASA guys decided in 2013, wouldn't it be a great idea if scopolamine was turned into an aerosol? Because normally it's a dust, essentially, from the seeds of the datura plant. And they create an aerosol version. You've got to ask yourself, what is NASA doing creating an aerosol version of the world's most dangerous drug?
Exactly.
And they say, well, it's for medical purposes. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, so it's used in anti-nausea what's wrong with Gravol? I mean, why would we take the risks? Oh, and also maybe some Parkinson's. I'm sorry, but why are we taking the risk of now what they've done, okay, is they've made it so that you can carry a little spray can about this big, and you could spray that in someone's face, and they're yours.
Oh my God! Now, when they sprayed you with it when you took your dog for a walk, what I read in your book is how it affected you, and how, as I recall reading, you started having trouble breathing. You fainted. You went unconscious. Someone found you and tried to wake you up, or did wake you up. So it sounded like that was the purpose of spraying you. Maybe it also scare you, of course, put you into submission, but to see what the result was, how much they could do before they kill you.
Correct. That's exactly what it is. And that's why I documented it in my book as a fatal weapons test. Because the level of dosage I got of that fog was so high that I experienced what thing is called Cheney-Stokes respiration syndrome, which I've looked up on what can happen with high doses of scopolamine. What happens is your breathing becomes less and less and less and less, and then you stop breathing. And then after a while, your brain kicks in and you gasp and you go, and then you get a little bit of oxygen and you're awake, and then bang, you're out again, and then less and less and less and less. So you're basically on the edge of death. Wow. And my dog actually tried he licked my lips and my nose, and that's the sensation of this long floppy tongue, wet tongue licking my face, it got me to take a breath. At the first time I woke up, and then the dog was gone the second time I woke up, and the dog later had to be put down because he had a bone injury, which then became inflamed and turned into cancer. And so that was a weapons test. And more recently, that was in 2014 in June. In January, I've had injections, which I don't understand, the needles, like what they were. I've been forced at gunpoint to inhale from a metered inhaler. You know those metered inhalers you get for asthma and that kind of stuff, and for respiratory problems? I was forced to inhale from one of those at gunpoint. I wouldn't do it at first because I knew it was a bad idea, and he pulled out his gun. So I don't know what sort of chemical and biological things have been tested on me, but I know that I've had a lot of things like that.
And injections, but you didn't know. And injections. You didn't know what they were.
Correct. And my health is not in good shape. Basically, I'm trying to fight getting cancer. I know I've been given something that causes cancer because I've had medical tests confirming. And this was actually not Mitch. This was something that happened outside of the July 1st timeline, that end of the book. But it was another intelligence agency that has been contracted by the people that Mitch works for. Why
do you think they did that? Was it either to make sure that you die, or was it to test something to see if it creates cancer?
No, this was definitely to make sure that I die. Okay. Because it was a radionuclei. Okay. And radionuclei is a very specific purpose. What it does is it exposes your internal organs in your abdomen to where it's injected to a lot of radiation. And what that does is it actually, as the cells divide, you get that mitosis, or whatever it's called, and then you get, if there's any radiation that hits at that time, that's it. You get cancer cells. Also, it punches alpha emitters. But by the way, I had 2 injections, August 3rd of 2015 and August 25th of 2015. The first one was an alpha, beta, and gamma emitter, and the second one was just a beta and a gamma emitter. The alpha emitter was particularly dangerous because alpha particles have mass, whereas beta and gamma are like photons. So they spread their energy over a greater area. But the alpha actually have mass, and so they come out like bullets as it decays, and they punch holes in all of your cells. So I am taking all sorts of supplements and treatments to try and stop from getting cancer. But basically, my lifetime has been shortened considerably. And that's because I've become a political liability to both the Canadian government and the American government primarily, but also to the Canadian government, well, not so much the government, but the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, because they've been involved in 3 of these events. One of them, which was the abduction in 2007, that was the first abduction, and that was a very violent thing, as well as in 2005, the RCMP officer was present. And then again, just in 2015, in the Mayholm invasion, the RCMP officer was let in the front door by Mitch.
Wow.
And they had me confess to terror plots that Mitch had told me to come up with before he let the guy in. And he talked with a guy downstairs here, just 10 feet away from me, for about 5 or 10 minutes to give me time. Then he came upstairs. And then I had to say these plots, which were recorded by the RCMP. And furthermore, 2 weeks later, I was accosted at the Don Mills and Eglinton superstore here in Toronto, big grocery store. And just as I opened my door to get in the driver's side after putting the groceries in, a guy comes up behind me in plain clothes and says, "Hey, we can seize your car." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Oh, well, you're a terrorist. Under anti-terror law, we can seize all of your assets as proceeds." I'm going, "What? I'm not a terrorist." I got my car, I drove away. That's Bill C-51, which just passed in Canada in the last year, which lowers the threshold, essentially. So now what we have here in our democratic society in Canada and in the United States, I presume, is people are being tortured and drugged, and forced to give confessions, which are then used to tag them as terrorists, which are then used to threaten to take away all their belongings, their families, house, everything, car, to shut them up because they've been selected for this MKUltra research.
Wow, this is amazing. And again, you have so much courage to come out and talk about this. Have you seen others, personally, have you seen others who were victims and survivors of MKUltra or victims of MKUltra and their testing?
Yes, I have. Now, some of these people, basically, there's this community on Facebook and on social media of targeted individuals. Targeted individuals are primarily people who are dealing with electronic, directed energy weapons and testing. They're huge. We're talking millions in Canada and the United States combined. But this group that I'm talking about, those people who are part of the MKUltra mind control stuff, we're a very small group within that. And then even smaller group within that is the super soldiers. Mm-hmm. And these are basically, these people have been raised by, the one that I spoke to had been raised by Nazis since birth and was torture trauma dissociated as an infant. And they're, programmed with up to 10 or more alters, or subpersonalities, if you will. And then they go into the military and they learn how to kill very effectively. And then they're used by the government for black ops, for doing things that they're very, very bad things, like illegal things. That's okay.
Well, I also heard that the government many times will take runaway teens, runaway kids, because essentially for many of those kids, no one's looking for them, especially kids who have run away from a foster home. They have run away from an abusive home where they already have that neglect and no one really cares, and that it's easy to just pull them off the streets and to do this type of testing.
Correct. And, if you want to think about it from a Machiavellian perspective, what they're doing is they're just choosing the most vulnerable in society, those for which there will have the fewest possible resources of people that are going to help look for them if they're missing or advocate on their behalf. So what we've seen in this human experimentation, which has been going on for, I looked at some research that showed back in from the First World War to the present, basically, there has been documented human experimentation in the United States and in Canada. And just last week, I got a call from one of my contacts, an MKUltra guy. Well, I shouldn't say he's MKUltra because I don't know that the money that was funding the researcher that did their terrible things to him was coming from the CIA or not. But this was at the University of Ottawa in the 1990s. Okay, this is just not that long ago. And so the people have been in this for a long time. Now, in Canada, this is particularly a topical question or issue that you're bringing up, because in Canada, we're having this investigation into missing and murdered Aboriginal women. Mm. And we're also having, there was an investigation into residential schools, because what happened here in Canada is that the we had a genocide essentially against Native people or Aboriginal people, and the government forced them. In fact, the RCMP would come to the door if you didn't put your children on the bus to that residential school for the whole year. They'd be taken away from you.
Wow.
The RCMP would come and take you. So all these Aboriginal children in Canada, we're talking hundreds and hundreds of thousands, were taken away, and most of them in those homes, which were run by religious orders of nuns and priests and ministers and all that,
okay,
most of them experienced severe abuse, and we're talking, physical, sexual. We're talking torture. Some of them would even get together every Friday night and put these kids on a little electric chair that they rigged up just to see the kids screaming and wiggling their legs. And this came out in the Truth and Reconciliation sort of investigation. But back to my original point, there's 4,000 missing women. And these are Native women. These are Aboriginal women. And now the RCMP doesn't have a very good record of investigating Aboriginal women who are experiencing crime. And I know that personally from one that I knew once that told me she was threatened and the RCMP wouldn't help her. And so what we have is, I think that pretty soon the dam will burst, and that it'll actually come out. The truth will come out that Native or Aboriginal children in Canada and even adults have been used for these experiments. I mean, there's reports of the children in the residential schools say that what would happen is the nuns would take the children in groups of 2 or 3 in the afternoon to the infirmary, and then they'd be in the infirmary, and then the next morning it would be announced, oh, they died. And then they'd have this little burial out in the cemetery of a closed coffin, or 3 little closed coffins. And then some of the children who were present heard officials coming into those monasteries or those residential schools in the middle of the night, and those officials had American accents. And then the next morning the children would be gone, and they would have this fake burial thing going on. And furthermore, the American Indian movement, which I had some connection with a little bit on Facebook, but not right now, but I used to, told me that there are survivors who are willing to provide testimony that this has happened, and that they actually went to the States and they managed to survive. So what happens with MKUltra human experimentation, which is mental and mind control, chemical, biological, and radiological, is that once a person has been in this program for some period of time, like 5 or 10 years, they start to become injured. And once they start to become injured, and like post-traumatic stress disorder and maybe other physical ailments, they are less useful. Furthermore, they know a lot now. They're more of a liability. And what if they start trying to get compensation or, being a whistleblower? So what they do is they graduate them to fatal weapons tests, which is what Joseph Mengele used to do when his twin Jewish children would get too injured. He would then escalate them into fatal tests, fatal medical tests. Wow. And this is what they're doing still to this day. Not Mengele, but these Nazi indoctrinated, second, third generation experimenters employed by the government, by intelligence agencies, and with the help of Canada's paramilitary in selecting the individuals and in doing joint ops on those individuals.
A lot of people do not want to hear that. A lot of people do not want to hear that MKUltra exists. They don't even want to hear about Operation Paperclip, even though that's so easy to research. What can you say to individuals who just want to turn the other cheek?
Well, I would like to quote, but I can't do it justice, that the guy who wrote that saying that said, first they came for the communists, but I was not, or socialist, I was not a socialist, so and then they came for the trade unionists, but I was not a trade unionist, so I didn't do anything. And, then they came for the Jews, but I was not a Jew, so I didn't do anything. And then they came for me, and there was nobody left. And I think that if people turn another cheek to massive human rights violations that, due to their nature of being covert black operations, are extremely hard to prove, because the people that are doing this are people whose whole training and education is in doing black operations. So how is the public supposed to provide a level of evidence sufficient for our court system, which is predicated upon the assumption that intelligence agencies act honorably at all times and don't do illegal things? And I think that predication, that assumption, is false. And what it does is it makes those of us in society who happen to be whistleblowers, happen to be somewhat maybe not mainstream views enough, we get targeted. And once we're targeted, and we get put in these experiments, we're basically dead. It's just a matter of time. And it's a human rights travesty, and it makes a mockery of our democracy.
I think anyone could go online and they could easily put in the search engine human experimentations that have been done. And a person can easily find loads, so many examples where secret human experimentations were done. And then later, okay, well, we shouldn't have done that. That was unethical, blah, 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 blah. But then it happens again, and it happens again, and it happens again, because people get something from it. The experimenters, whomever, get something from it. And as long as they get something from it and people turn a blind eye, there's no reason to stop. And people like you are being victimized, you're being tortured, you are likely to develop cancer. Kids, teenagers are being pulled off the streets to be experimented upon, tortured. And any of the listeners who have ever read my blog, The Silent Whisper in the Dark.com, I have loads of stories on there where I have spoken to ones who have been tortured. And they're no longer in the physical. They're deceased. But a lot of what they told me aligns with what you're saying right now. So it is disgusting. It is horrific. It is hard to hear. And I cannot possibly imagine how hard it is for you to endure it. First of all, survive it, and then talk about it.
Well, thank you. And just to your point about evidence, though, I just want to add that in 1975, in the U.S. Senate Church Committee investigation into MKUltra, in the CIA's program, they said they'd stop the program. It's all over. We're not doing it anymore. Well, the former deputy director of the CIA, Victor Marchetti, went on the public record subsequently and said, that is a cover story. Okay, new piece of information, 2015 or 14, there's a deep CIA insider who's been quoted at wanttoknow.info. And wanttoknow.info on the mind control topic, top right of the screen, folks, you will find the best collection of declassified CIA documents and current summaries of what's going on in this area. Very, very credible site, run by a guy who used to be the top interpreter in the U.S. State Department for Cheney, Bush, Clinton, all a bunch of people. And this guy is, he has got a whole bunch of journalists standing up for it. So we know this. People are saying this is going on. Credible people. What we lack is, it seems, a impartial, independent media to do the investigation and uncover this.
Absolutely, I completely agree. There might be one or two or little ones here and there, but certainly not the big media who could do this, and I don't think probably ever will. Matthew, how are you doing now? I know you were, and I didn't know you are still being tortured, so that was a surprise to me. But how are you functioning now? Are you working? Are you able to do other things? I know you're taking supplements to hopefully fight cancer.
Right. Well, so as of about 2 years ago or so, I had to stop working because in the trauma that happened in 2014, being gassed. I was gassed, okay, at a chemical weapons test 3 blocks from the center of Canada's largest city by a foreign military. And nothing was done. No investigation was done. And people are just turning away. So I was unable to work from post-traumatic stress disorder, and I am still very challenged because these events keep happening. In fact, the frequency has increased significantly. I had 4 home invasions in 2015. I've had 2 home invasions in 2016 so far. I am just trying to survive, and the advice that I've been given is to just disappear. Well, that's not so easy. First of all, I was born here. I don't see why I should have to flee my country. I would like to see a political diplomatic solution. I would like to see our Prime Minister, while he's talking to Obama, say, hey, that human experimentation thing? Apparently, your spy agency and our paramilitary signed something in the Cold War years. It's still going on, and, that's really not appropriate to be doing that kind of human rights violation. So can we just kind of tear that up and stop this? That's what I'm hoping for. I realize that's too much probably to hope for, but, there's no place to flee to get out of the reach of these folks. I mean, I could try, but if I do that, I'm in some other country. It's a lot easier to take me out. Who's going to? I don't have neighbors that know me. I don't have a history here. Anyway. I'm some foreign national that got disappeared. And so none of these options are particularly attractive. And I'm just trying to take every day at a time, and just trying to make the best of what I can. Thankfully, my wife is working. And I should just say, to your earlier point, how I survived. I would not have survived had I not the incredible support of my wife, who is especially prepared to deal with these kinds of situations, having grown up in communist China during Mao's Cultural Revolution in a top targeted family, who reports, by the way, despite growing up in a top targeted family during Mao's Cultural Revolution, the persecution, shock, illness in this family in the last 10 years is worse than she experienced growing up in China.
Wow. Well, what you are talking about is a perfect example of that everyone has a choice. You can either flee, sit in fear, go off somewhere and hide, or you can talk about it. You can expose it. You can continue your work. And that's always a choice, I think, for just about everybody. And a lot of people choose to live in fear. They choose to hide, and they don't want any exposure. I understand that. I'm not criticizing it. I'm just stating there's always a choice. And you have chosen to really speak out. And I'm very honored that you are on my show, Matthew.
Well, thank you very much, Tami. I'm very honored to be on your show. I really appreciate your interviewing. I really, really do.
And I want to thank the listeners as well for joining me here on Journey for Truth on iHeartRadio and YouTube. Until next time, have a fantastic week.